Welcome, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us. My name is Phil Wagner. I'm the CEO and founder of Sparta Science. For the past 2 months, we've hosted webinars, particularly focused on return to sport. And when we talked about return to sport, a lot of it really came down to organizational health, because whether you're in sport or corporate or obviously the military, every organization shares the same number one asset, and that's their people. And so some of the things we've been talking about, whether it's athletes or warfighters or employees, they're really lessons for us all. And so with the heightened risk of every organization now, especially with COVID, I think organizations, military or otherwise, are hyper aware of the balance that's needed. How do we balance this need to optimize performance? And also, how do we balance that against prioritization of health? And so I've been looking forward to this time because leaders in the armed forces have faced challenges for decades. Making high stakes decisions, challenging circumstances. And unlike other organizations in the military, stakes are much higher than losing a game or missing a day of work. So for an effective environment, both performance and health have to be balanced, prioritized. And for that to happen, there's got to be incredible communication and really strong alignment across the org. And the best example of this, we don't have to look any further than the US military and our allies when we start talking about communication and alignment. And so we're very fortunate to have career-long military leaders with us today. And they're going to give us some insights into how strategies and organizational alignment can help prioritize the welfare of their warfighters in the face of emerging threats. And, before we kind of dive in here with the panel and our panel introduces themselves, a quick disclaimer that this webinar is intended to provide insightful information to the public. But the views and opinions expressed as part of this webinar do not necessarily state or reflect those of the institutions that the panelists represent. And then once we get done with these introductions, we'll also go through a quick Q&A to finish out the webinar. So feel free to submit any questions using the Q&A feature. So to start off with introductions, I want to start with General Malcolm Frost. If you wouldn't mind, please introduce yourself and ideally provide some context towards your background and why you are particularly passionate about some of these topics we'll be discussing.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So I want to welcome the audience out there. Thanks for participating. It's my honor to be here with all the panelists, with you, Phil, and with the Sparta Science team. Really, why I'm here is based on my background. And my background, I grew up playing sports, was a Division I soccer player at the United States Military Academy at West Point. So health, fitness, sports has always been a part of my life. And then as a career infantryman, obviously physical fitness is extremely important, as is mental fitness. Because your job is to close with and destroy the enemy. And, we have been at war for now nearly 20 years and have spent quite a bit of time, obviously, in that endeavor. I'm now retired, but my last couple of jobs were the Chief of Public Affairs to the United States Army, and I was in charge of all initial military or entry training. And in the last job, I was also in charge of holistic health and fitness for the United States Army. And that initiative of trying to get fitness and health down to the tactical level, down to the tactical edge in all of our organizations across the 1.1 million person United States Army. And not just that, force culture change as well. And I'll talk about that, but that also includes the new combat fitness test. So anyway, this health, fitness, sports, and the military and readiness have been a passion for me for a long time, as well as leadership and other things that are kind of naturally attuned to the United States military. So thanks, Phil.
Thank you. General Murray, if you wouldn't mind, briefly introducing yourself and some context as well towards your background around some of the topics we're going to be discussing.
Sure. And again, I'll echo the comments of our previous speaker. Thanks for the invite. It's an honor to be here with you all. As far as me for a background, I spent most of my career in the Air Force, flying fighters in operational assignments all across really all across the world. Europe, Asia, the States, and of course, multiple deployments to the Middle East. When I wasn't doing that, I spent a lot of time in basically other operational assignments, to include 2 years with the 101st Airborne Division. So I was actually went in on the ground initially in Afghanistan as well as Iraq. as an air liaison officer, which gave me a pretty unique perspective from the rest of my fighter pilots. Look from the ground looking up rather than from the air looking down. In my current role, I'm able to bring kind of all that together as the Inspector General for the Air Combat Command, because the Inspector General is going through a really interesting transformation right now in our Air Force, getting away from just inspecting on just your normal day-to-day compliance, crossing T's, dotting I's, rote following of regulations, to a real focus on readiness, and not just the readiness that we've been having to do the last few years deploying to the Middle East, but really high-end readiness against near-peer competitors like China and Russia. So it's with that kind of context that I come in today, and really I've been trying to think deeply about how our entire Air Force is going to have to think and act and train and organize differently from our big units all the way down to our individual airmen. Thanks.
Thank you. Love the balance. Colonel Stephen Arms, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and why you're passionate about some of the things we're going to be going into today.
Yeah, thanks, Phil, for having me. As you said, I'm a career Marine infantry by background for 28 years. The last 3 years of my active duty time was as the director of the Marine Corps Force Fitness Division. Outside of the infantry and the normal career progression of a Marine infantryman, was also involved in all Marine sports for about 15 years, and was able to represent the United States at the world level in triathlon. And so all that passion, coupled with the military background, brought me back to Virginia to stand up the Force Fitness Division along with the team, and really take the holistic perspective of the Marine as a system and a holistic look at all things fitness for all Marines across the force, and start to tailor a program that catered to all Marines regardless of their MOS.
Great. Thank you, Colonel. General Scott Winter, same question. Briefly introduce yourself and any background would be appreciated.
Yeah, I've revised my intro about 3 times there based on the humility that you've got to have be in this sort of company. Hey, look, thanks very much for the opportunity to participate today. My current role, it's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially I'm the Australian Defence Force liaison to the Pentagon, to the Joint Staff specifically. But my background is a combat arms officer in the Australian Army, having spent the majority of my career focused on building resilient teams to fight and win the current and the next battle. I guess that's my real passion in that regard, is building teams that are based on trust, that are resilient. And the work that we've done with Sparta and with our allies in recent years to try and work out smarter and better ways to do that are an absolute passion of mine. But anything I can do to learn how we can better empower our people to get the most out of themselves is really what drives me every day. Don't get me wrong, it's great working on big headquarters. It's a real privilege, of course, but ultimately it's all about the warfighter. Thanks.
Thank you, General. Yeah, and hopefully those of you out in the audience can really pick up on at least I am, on the authenticity that the group we have today that operates both as from a leadership standpoint, but also as a warfighter or athlete standpoint. So there's both that practicality as well as that leadership balance from everybody we have on the panel today, which is, I think, a crucial part of being an authentic leader. As we kind of kick off into this first piece here, first topic, military response to COVID-19. In the short term, our new normal, or as the military is using the term, the new abnormal. General Winter, you mentioned where you're stationed now after being in Australia, now at the Pentagon. It's a very unique position because you're kind of at the epicenter of military intelligence. And so, with respect to COVID-19, what sort of insights can you share around the U.S. and the Allied response to some of the things that we're seeing?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think it's worth to sort of looking at sort of how we've managed to prioritize what we've done over the last couple of months, because it really goes to the heart of the challenges that commanders and leaders have out there, both in uniform and elsewhere. So step one at the start of the crisis was protect the force. We've got to look after it. You've got to get your arms around your own people, the ability to make sure that you put those measures in place to look after the humans involved, because this has been a very human experience to date. But concurrent with that, and we've got a bit of a analogy that you can only stretch so far. And there's you're in the aircraft and the mask drops down. You've got to put your mask on before you help anyone else. But you've got to continue the mission. So if you're flying that plane at that particular point in time, you've got to get the mask on and continue to fly the plane. So we've got people around the world who are currently on mission, who have had to adapt very, very quickly to the reality of this new emerging security environment. So protect the force, but you've got to be able to continue the mission as well. And then very quickly, clearly, the imperative of all of our communities has been that need that we've had to provide support to that whole of government domestic response. So look after your people, continue the mission that we've had every day, but very quickly we've had to ramp up and provide a significant degree of support to the communities and every level of government. We've seen that in the United States to a tremendous effect, whether that's the incredible hospital ships that have gone to either coast, the number of fuel hospitals that have been set up, and sometimes it's just that degree of coordination and stabilizing effect that the military can provide. But at the end of those three, importantly, it's the ability to sort of, once you've got your mask on, is to start to help others, right? So the ability to then, okay, who are our friends and allies and what help do they need? And that all of that requires an incredible degree of agility and ability to adapt quickly on the behalf of commanders and leaders at every level. And we use that line every level, pretty easily sometimes, but the reality is, that ability to look after your people, that's squad leaders and the like down at very sort of low level, all the way through to putting those measures in place, to ensure that we can continue the mission, we can support the local government, but then very, very quickly start to react beyond that. And that, as you can appreciate, puts enormous pressure on readiness and a very, very different sort of lens to start to look through individual and collective capability.
Yeah, so seems like a lot of that is really that balancing of the short term, right? You guys don't have the, there's a need to balance basically ongoing missions, as you mentioned, versus, what's the longer term aspect look like? A huge part seems like is, a leader in general, right, is being able to balance that short and long-term priorities and where to invest time and energy with those that you have in your organization.
Look, absolutely. Yeah, but I would say that as much as we are working towards a new normal, this is something that militaries have done in time immemorial, and that is, you react to the crisis that you're in. You keep an eye on the bigger picture at the same time. And the key to us here, though, is that rather than saying we're heading towards a post-COVID environment, some of the smart leaders I'm working with here at the Pentagon sort of talk about a COVID impacted environment. That is, we just need to adapt to the fact that this is going to be with us for a significant period of time, and new normal doesn't mean we just get back to the old normal.
Yeah, totally agree. I think, as we'll get into, right, it's more of an accelerant, right, than a new era. It's accelerated where a lot of the world was headed. General Frost, and we've had a lot of discussions about that in particular, and also had a lot of discussions around leadership strategies. And certainly some of those things get exposed and more necessary in times of crisis like this. What are some strategies that others can learn from the military, especially when dealing with, I think the biggest challenge is uncertainty, right? That a lot of organizations maybe aren't used to dealing with, where the military, is used to dealing with more of this uncertainty and volatility.
Right. Well, Phil, one of the things the military has done for a long time, and General Winter alluded to this, is, we deal with crisis. So in order to deal with that, you got to put together a framework or a model, or figure out how you can align your organizations. And one of the ways you do this, I think, is we break crisis up into phases, and you got to understand those phases where you are, and then you have to have a plan of attack within those phases. we've been through this. I put these crises into 5 phases. The first phase was the organizational impact. Boom. Organizations got immediately impacted. The second, we've been living this for months, is the human impact. That's phase 2. Phase 3 is how do you get into readiness or business continuity if you're a business, whether you're a sports team, military, or an organization, business, corporation, etc. We're in that right now, trying to figure out how do we continue the business while we're dealing with the human impacts and those organizational impacts. Phase 4 is, I think, where we're getting to next, and that is where we're slowly sliding into, and that is the new abnormal. And I call the new abnormal is in between the way things used to be to where the new normal is post-COVID. And what do I mean by that? I mean, the new normal comes when we have treatments, when we have antibodies, and we have immunities at scale across the nation or across the globe. When we have that, we can go into what is a new normal, and we're dealing with that COVID enhanced, or I'll call the new abnormal environment. And one of the ways in which you deal with that, and then phase 5 is resilience. And resilience means what lessons do you learn from that abnormal environment, apply them to the new normal so that you are prepared for aftershocks or the next crises that might occur. And a way to frame this, if you think about it, is what we used to do when we redeploy from Iraq or Afghanistan. We would break things down into a framework or a model. And just very briefly, I couch this as the 5R campaign plan. I call it now the 5R return to work or workplace model. And those 5 R's are, you got to reintegrate. You got to reintegrate the people. That's the most important thing. That's number 1. Welcome them back. It's phased. How do you reward those or recognize those that did unbelievable work while we were in this crisis? How do you remember those who were lost or those family members? Mental, spiritual awareness, child care, those who have parental care. How do you balance telework? And then how do leaders self-manage through this? That's reintegration. This phase is the first R. The second R is reset, and that's resetting your equipment. We've been away from a lot of our equipment, and so you have to look at the machinery, technology. We're gonna have to look at things like air filtering, how do we test, health monitoring, PPE, all the things we're starting to do, organizations are looking at. Distance protocol, and one of the most important things, I think, in resetting is reset your employee or your soldier or airman or Marine feedback channel, because things are gonna be different. The old channels aren't gonna work. How do you get more horizontal feedback so you can quickly understand what's happening? Number 3 is reorganize. There are things that we're going to learn that we've learned, trade-offs, redesign, organizational reviews that can happen, leadership, digital solutions that we've learned through this crisis, culture changes. There may be layoffs, comp and ben changes if you're a business that you have to go into. Phase 4, the 4th R is retrain, and I think that's everything from your basic fundamentals, whether that's military readiness at the individual or the small unit level to just the business fundamentals of any organization that's out there, or sports team, quite frankly. Health protocols, your digital procedures, and business process review. And then the last R, I think, is the second most important to reintegrating the people first. Because if you don't reintegrate first, reset, reorganize, and retrain won't matter. You have to go into resilience. And that means leader training and management, succession planning. You'll learn who your stars were that you didn't think, and you can look at who your high performers are and who aren't. You'll learn a lot about your people through this crisis. Supply chain reliance, which is, I think, huge for the military. We've seen it for the business. There's an impact there as well. We've learned a lot. And then your digital and virtual systems. And how can you get more resilient so that the next crisis that comes, you're ready for it and more prepared in what is the new normal beyond this new abnormal.
I really appreciate kind of the wording of, we're talking about a COVID enhanced world, right? And a resilience of, certainly a terrible crisis we're going through, but, the expectation and the goal should be to come out stronger than previously. And I think that's important as for any organization to learn from the military. Just it's been a normal part with, the day-to-day you guys have had to deal with for decades. General Murray, how has the Air Force adjusted to what's been going on, and what new practices? General Frost talked a lot about, some of the new reintegrations. And so what new practices do you think will remain with the Air Force after kind of this return to a new normal?
Sure. Well, I think that 5R model works really well. And whether we, knowingly or not, I think the Air Force has been following through on that. One thing that we found is that even through this whole process, there are certain things that you just got to do. You got to keep doing that don't stop and can't stop. Those no-fail missions in the Air Force are things like nuclear command and control, obviously our nuclear silos, homeland defense, all of those. We have fighters all across the United States on standby for either another 9/11 type incident or anything else like it. And those missions cannot stop. And so in an environment, like you said, of uncertainty, it makes it very difficult, because I think the Air Force is, and the military in general, trains our people to be very good at managing risk. And risk assumes a certain level of understanding of probabilities, percentages. If I do this, this might, this is most likely to happen, and this might happen. This is worst case. I can plan for those. What we find ourselves here in many cases is just this uncertainty. We don't have that background data to say, just how deadly the disease is, just how much it transmits back and forth. And so in those kind of situations, what we've gone to is, in a time of uncertainty, you try to prevent, you try to prevent that situation that you would have the most regret about. And it's kind of like worst case scenario, but it's a little different. And so for us, that means worst case would be, obviously our nuclear capabilities falling offline, or something to that effect. And so we concentrated very hard on that initially, taking very draconian steps in many cases to quarantine those folks. After that, probably the next closest no-fail mission was the next forces on step to go to the Middle East, or to go to any other place downrange and get ready to deploy. We accepted more risk there in a time of uncertainty than we might have otherwise, because we know that those forces are expected downrange and are going to be needed right now. Kind of the third tier of folks are those that are, not on the current step to go. And so you've got more options there. And so for most of those folks, the kind of the less than mission essential, we took a very defensive posture and have gone to, in many cases, sometimes 100% teleworking. And so those are kind of the things that we did initially. And as we start to come out of this, we're finding some things that, we may not go back to the old way of doing business. And just give you one example, and then I'll move on. But so we, in the Air Force, particularly when we're getting ready to do big missions, we bring everybody into a big room. The fighter pilots are all in there. The bomber pilots are in there. The tanker pilots. We all the intel officers, and they brief the whole situation. We all discuss it. The fighter pilot gets up and says, here's the plan to protect the force. The bombers say, here's the plan to go do this, and on and on and on. And then we go out, we fly it, and then we come back in the room afterwards and debrief it. Obviously, in a COVID type of environment, that there's an incredible amount of risk there. If just one person is sick, you get the whole darn room sick. And so we've gone to a much more distributed, similar to this type of setup, where we're briefing it all over the internet. We go fly it and we come back and we debrief it the same way. And as we've been looking into it and we look out into the future, I know this will be one of our topics a little later, we think that's actually probably how we're going to have to do business going forward. That in the future environment, we're not going to be able to mass our forces, particularly our air forces, all in one place. They're just too juicy of a target for the enemy. And so we're learning things now in this COVID environment that we intend to bring forward into the future and future combat.
Yeah, and so much of our discussion have been around how important people are as our asset for an organization. And so really kind of, bucketing those groups into levels of essentialness during times like these has been helpful, seems like, for the organization to continue to execute, particularly on the things that are most important. Colonel Arms, a lot of discussions that you and I have had have really been around the practical approach, Marines have taken. And so if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about some of the practical adjustments made on the front lines in response to COVID-19.
Yeah, Phil, I think, had this happened in 1925, I think everybody would have known what to do, because we had just been through a great pandemic of 1918. And so going into this one, having been the lead DoD planner from 06 to 08 for what we thought was going to be the next pandemic at that time, which was H5N1. When I first got that assignment as an infantryman, I looked at it and said, this is a medical issue. Why is an infantryman leading planning for a medical problem? But the more I got into it, the more it became it's a threat. It's a threat just like anything else. And you fight a threat, whether it be a virus or a live enemy, in a lot of ways in the same manner. You look for the surfaces and you look for the gaps, and you try to exploit the gaps as much as you can. And I think that's what we've done. There's been a lot of negative, I guess, context in the media of course, the death rates, as tragic as that is, the business is shutting down, but there's also been a lot of positives that I don't think get talked about as much as they should. The big one being the military has not stopped their mission. The military has continued to press all across the globe with all our allies with the mission. That hasn't changed. We've taken COVID precautions, but the mission itself has continued. And I think it's a very important dynamic to look at because, with U.S. Northcom and DISCA and all that, the military is being asked to help local authorities in some cases. And so the mission for the military hasn't changed, but I think some of the lessons that it's learned at a practical level is, at least in what I have observed, is we kind of had an industrial age mindset. We had large headquarters, everybody had to go in the office, you had large staff meetings. Well, COVID prevented us from doing that. And I think in some ways pushed us forward into the 21st century a lot faster. I used to look at telework as a televacation. I didn't understand the concept, but having on March 12th, when I found out I was up at a medical appointment at Walter Reed, found out the hospital was shutting down for non-emergency situations. I came home and said, guys, let's figure this out. We got about 12 hours to do it. And we sent them home. And so the technology that's now in place, and we always talk about continuity of operations, a COOP plan. And we do these exercises to exercise a COOP plan from time to time. Well, COVID has forced everybody to exercise a COOP plan. And so I think we're finding that we can't travel. So TAD or TDY, whichever branch of the service you're in, we can't do that. So how do you still do the mission without physically flying somewhere to talk to somebody? Well, VTC, you get back to the phone. So entry-level training has continued with precautions put in place, the quarantines, the hand washings, the wearing of face masks. But especially at the larger headquarters level, like we have a lot of in the NCR, at least from where I sit with my team, they did not miss a beat. They were able to get on the SharePoints. They were able to do the VTCs, everything from a geographically dispersed environment. Had we be taking artillery fire, we would have geographically dispersed our force to protect them. This is no different than that. It's just, looking at the threat as it is. We've even been able to onboard new hires, athletic trainers, new GS positions, utilizing the COVID restraints. Even done a retirement ceremony. My own retirement ceremony was done on YouTube with about 10 of us in the room there, just so that we could keep people geographically dispersed. I think that's really forced us, like I said, to execute that COOP plan and still continue the mission. And let's face it, if I was a battalion commander again, for battalion commander again, or company commander, it would be a lot harder to have my folks telework. You just can't do it. But there are a lot of things we do within the military where we can geographically disperse, use technology to do that. But the mission of the military has not faltered one bit. The military is continuing to press with everything that we've been asked to do by our nation.
Hey, Phil, I'd like to jump in just really quick and just really jump on something that I think a few folks have said is, we've been trying to go towards this environment where the threat, we have big tactical operations centers, we aggregate on forward operating bases and combat outposts. We have big briefings on bases and posts, and all these types of things that we've been trying to get away because we know what the future threats are. And, whether it's gray zone, hybrid warfare with threats that might be, in the continent of Europe, or whether it's, area denial threats that might be in the Indo-Asia Pacific. We know that we have to operate disaggregated, and we have to move a lot, and we can't be in one place for very long. And so what I think this crisis, quite frankly, is helping us do is recognize and see right in our face the threat of being in groups and in mass, and we're seeing it luckily through the lens of a relative peacetime environment. I know we're still at war, but not to the scale we were previously. So I think it's allowed us to view that threat more poignantly, and is going to allow us to better understand how we visualize those threats or potential threats across the globe, and then be able to prepare our tactics, our techniques, our procedures a little bit better to ensure that we are thinking more strategic, not just tactically, but in alignment with how we have thought strategically about future threats.
Right. That makes total sense. And I think, strategically, as you guys kind of talk about things at a high level, I think one of the, aspects that continues to amaze me is also the balanced ability to think tactically. As you mentioned, I think readiness is a big factor when we talk about, General Murray mentioned leaders have to think at the unit level, right? And, so when we think about that readiness and humans being our most important and most valuable assets, going to a real, deep level here, one of the leading factors, right, irrespective of COVID, right, is lost days due to musculoskeletal injuries. And it isn't an issue isolated to the armed forces by any means. Over half the U.S. population, is suffering from some sort of MSK injury on a daily basis. So any organization, sports, health, can look at the military to identify, okay, how can we solve this issue as well in a more scalable way? So General Frost, if you wouldn't mind kind of describing the impact you've seen of MSK on readiness in the Army specifically, what improvements are being made and still might need to be made within, the organization.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. The most important weapon system we like to say in the United States Army is the individual soldier. Yet I would argue for decades, we did not put our money where our mouth was. From the M4 rifle to the M1 tank, we have parts and supplies, and we do preventive maintenance checks and services, and we have all these electronic monitoring and physical monitoring and digital data and hard data to look at it. We have training areas, training ranges, billions of dollars thrust into those assets. Yet I would argue, what did we invest in for the individual soldier? We basically invested in outdated morale, welfare, and recreation gymnasiums and centralized medical treatment facilities. It takes 30 to 45 days to see somebody if you get hurt. We did not do what we did for our equipment. We didn't treat soldiers, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen and sailors as the most important asset. We certainly didn't do it in the Army. So what ended up happening? We ended up we had basically went up to 17% of the United States Army was non-deployable, could not deploy. I mean, it was incredible. 17% of active duty, 25% of reserve National Guard soldiers can't pass the body mass index. We had, musculoskeletal injuries were affecting 55% of soldiers every single year. 10 million duty days lost. $577 million spent annually on patient care. And the majority of that was due to musculoskeletal injuries and other medical issues that were tied to health and fitness inadequacies. If you think about that, 17, and right now it's 12% of active duty. They've got it down. There's been a lot of great work that's been done in the last couple of years. That's 56,000 or so non-deployable. That's equivalent to the loss of 13 brigade combat teams of 3,000 to 5,000 people each. That's just huge. And so we can't have that. That's, it's almost like half of the Marine Corps was not deployable, if you think about it through that type of a term. And so, right. Every single person has to get on the field to play. You can't imagine a football team going out there and putting 8 people on the field fighting against somebody who's got, or playing against somebody who's got 11, or a basketball team going with 3 out of 5. They're going to lose. And so we needed our squads to have 9 of 9 people. And so the Army has invested heavily changing culture with the new fitness test that is based on the 10 components of physical fitness that every soldier must be able to execute in order to do their warrior task battle drills and skills. What they have to do as a soldier was regressed into those 10 components of fitness. We stopped neglecting 30 years of what we knew in health and fitness in the nation, and then we developed a test to test what you must do in combat or in a high threat area. And that new test is going to go online here shortly, officially, and it's already been being trained to. But then we had this holistic health and fitness initiative. We piloted putting physical therapists, occupational therapists, athletic trainers, and strength and conditioning coaches down to the tactical level, to the tactical edge, to our battalions of 300 to 800 folks. And in 2021 here, you're going to see, I think, the first several dozen brigade-sized units. We have 500 brigade-sized units in the Army. Talk about scale. Brigades are 2,000 to 4,000 folks each, right? 500 of those, but we're going to start getting those professionals down to that level to do prevention, put together good strength and fitness plans that are tailored towards the mission and what you must do as a soldier in combat, and then to do prevention and then rehabilitation and get it down to the tactical level where it needs to be to reduce those injuries and looking long-term fitness-wise, and then also increase readiness of our organizations on a human level, every one individual at a time. In order to do that, what I would argue is we have to arm those professionals. We have to arm them with the equipment so that they can measure effectively, measure the effects of those health programs. Objective measurements have got to be there. We've got to arm them with that equipment because we're spending taxpayer dollars. We've got to go to Congress and show this is the effect we're having. And we've got to have objective measurement tools that we can put down at scale for 1 million people in the United States Army very quickly to measure in order to show the effectiveness of those health and fitness programs and those professionals we're investing in down at the tactical level.
Right. And I think, the point, right, in case it was missed by listeners, is that, to make these kinds of changes, it happens at the individual level, yet with the masses that the military has, right, it needs to have some sort of objective test, retest to say, okay, or is what we're doing with the individual work, and is it a scalable solution, right, that can be rolled out to everybody. And I know Colonel Arms, one of the initiatives that you've been involved with Marines was implementation of more athletic trainers and enablement tools. And so if you wouldn't mind, talk a little bit about the Marines are doing to combat some of the MSK injuries we're seeing.
Well, the first thing we did was really looked at, every Marine as the human body as a weapon system. And in 2017, when I got here, and for the past, 28 years or so, I've known that there's been high schools out there in the United States with more sports medicine capability than the military at large. And so we tried to take a multifaceted approach. First with the force fitness instructors, that is a Marine that comes back to Quantico. She goes through 6 weeks of intense kinesiology, physiology, nutrition, a little sports science. They get college credit for going through that from University of Kansas. But they're the ones that goes back to their unit. And it doesn't matter if they're aviation unit, infantry unit, logistics. They design a program of fitness based on their unit's mission essential task list. Because before this, you may have had an All-American platoon commander from pick a college, and if he was an All-American runner, his platoon was probably going to be very good at running. But did that equate to success in their mission as a infantry platoon? I don't know, because there was no way to measure that. So the force fitness instructor is handpicked by the commander at the company or battalion level. They come back for 6 weeks. They get trained on how to program fitness for their unit based on those mission essential task lists. But at the battalion or the squadron level, they now have an athletic trainer, soon to have a strength coach. They've got nutrition support. And there's a lot of other technology things that we're utilizing as well. Looking at a couple of the programs of instruction within entry-level training that have a high attrition rate, it was very obvious early on to me that, okay, I can look at a list of drops and tell you why they were dropped, for what injury, but I can't tell the causal factor of that injury. Was it lack of preparation, or what was it? So things like force plate machine learning allowed us to jump that candidate, recruit, a lieutenant going to infantry officer course, and identify those imbalances. And then early, before they got a chance to go to training, as early as possible, before they started training, give them a custom designed workout program based on those imbalances, to try to alleviate those risk of injuries. So we've seen success with this at entry-level training. I mean, the musculoskeletal injuries assignments to the medical rehab platoon at the recruit depots, both at Paris Island and at San Diego, in 2003 were around 11% assignment rates just for musculoskeletal injuries. Today, it's about 3%. What was the causal factor of that? Well, the athletic trainers were introduced in 2003 at the battalion level, to go out there with the recruits, not only program their fitness, but also be out there with them so that they can, just like a trainer would on the sidelines at an NFL game, immediately start assessing the injury and then helping them out. But we didn't have that in the operational forces. In the Fleet Marine Force, we didn't have that until 2018. And just like anything, Marines are really suspect to any kind of change. But as soon as they got these people, the first phone calls I started getting was, how do I use this AT? And I said, well, sit down and talk to them. They will tell you how they can be employed. But that athletic trainer works for that battalion commander or squadron commander. But what I wasn't, I guess, really, I didn't foresee, I knew the physical side would be one thing, but the mental side. So now you have a Marine that gets hurt, and I was out talking with one several months ago, who was enamored that this athletic trainer that's now working on him was at an NFL team the year prior and taping somebody's ankles. And so the Marine's like, I don't feel like broken cargo anymore. I feel like I'm still part of the team. I'm told what I can do physically to continue to train with my unit. And the AT is helping us, work through that. And, they're not cheap, but, as others have said, we lose a lot of people every year from musculoskeletal injuries. And extrapolating what's happened at ELT, we think we can probably save about 80% of those out there in the operational forces, which in one of the regiments out there, they had 12 Marines that were headed for what we call a PEB. Basically, they're going to be med boarded out of the Marine Corps. But the AT was able to work with them day in and day out and get them all back into training. Just those dozen Marines paid for half the athletic trainers we had in the Marine Corps at that time. So I think the cost, it pays for itself multiple times over in the cost of these musculoskeletal injuries. And the other piece of it is the recruiters are out there. I don't care what branch of service you're with. They're out there every single day trying to find the very best talent to come in their service. And if you're a Triton half of that at a physically demanding entry-level pipeline, it doesn't make much sense to throw 100 people to get 50. So if you're able to do force plate machine learning, program fitness for them before arrival, your chances of them succeeding at a higher rate drastically go up, therefore reducing some of the stress on your recruiting force and the cost before they enter the operational forces.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you mentioned there too is with that kind of technology, you might have somebody that is similar risk to another, but their causes can be completely different, and that's where technology can help at least narrow that down. General Winter, taking another angle, a look at this, how will this, COVID-19 economy, how's it going to affect other government priorities? Being in the central location you're at, how is this really going to affect, where the government is prioritizing their time and efforts?
Yeah, look, thanks again. And I think I've doubled the number. I came in with about 3 pages of notes, and I think about up to 7. So if anyone's not learning from this discussion, they're missing a trick. Hey, look, won't surprise anyone that pretty early on, after sort of looking at the reprioritisation and how we get after the mission, is the impact of the economy. The Australian Prime Minister openly said we're in 2 crises. So we've got a health crisis and we've got an economic crisis at the same time. And the lesson, for, we're privileged in this regard is that we're not waiting to be told that. We can see the writing on the wall that there's going to be pressures on spending, whether it's because there's less money going around or the priorities for spending are going to be elsewhere because of the current crisis. So we've got the opportunity now to start to make some decisions about how we can be smarter and more efficient about how we get after some of these problems. And you referred right in the outset there, Phil, to the fact that never waste a good crisis. A crisis is an accelerant for change, and some of those changes are already there. And the sort of technologies that we're talking about now, can really act as a glue to sort of bring together some of the smart things that are already happening. So if we're looking for a more efficient way to look after our people, and some of the things that General Frost and Colonel Arms have already spoken about there, that even if we didn't want to look after our people because it's the right thing to do, just from an economic standpoint, you can't afford to lose the sort of talent that has been sort of slipping through our fingers in the past there. So the previous ad hoc approach that we've had to training and looking after our people just can't be the way that we utilise going forward. So one of the unique things I would say about the next generation of soldiers that's coming through is that they are desperate to be empowered with the tools to be able to get after this stuff themselves. Previously, fitness and professional development were things that we delivered to our people. Now it's very much something that people want to take ownership. And the beauty of some of the tools and technologies and the smart plate technologies there, when you see the light come on in a soldier's eyes and they realise they now have ownership of their own journey going forward, that's an extremely powerful point. But as a commander, that ability to make sure that we are doing our training the smartest possible way, that we are reducing our injury rates. And quite frankly, a very good friend of yours and mine, who I won't name, but who sort of is never short of a good idea, explained to me in his football club that when he realised that he was in the business of keeping players on the park, he realised what his business was all about. And in no small way is exactly what's been alluded to by General Frost and Colonel Arms. There is exactly that. We need to keep our players on the park. We need to be able to set them up for success. And the beauty of some of these technologies that are coming through is they tie together what we already have, and that's commanders, soldiers, physical training instructors, or whatever different militaries are using at the moment, plus the technology, the science that sort of glues those together. And what you get is greater than the sum of its parts. So it's really quite exciting. And the opportunity, like I said, don't waste a crisis. As an accelerant of change, there's an opportunity now to really pile onto a better way of doing things. Because frankly, what we were doing before was ad hoc, and the opportunity now to do, look after our soldiers in a much smarter way, empower them to take some personal ownership of, and some personal feedback in a way that we haven't been able to do at mass before, is really quite exciting.
Yeah, I love that term. You've used it before in our discussions, organizational glue. It's such a good way to describe technology that's actually relevant, right? It binds the group together as a unit. General Murray, how will the physical demands of airmen, start to change here with a lot of these updated tactics, that are evolving and accelerating with this crisis? How are we going to see this start to change the physical demands for airmen?
Yeah, you bet. So we've been hitting on a lot of these themes here, and one of them is that we're accelerating to a future that we kind of already saw coming, and that we know looks a lot like this. And so, future conflict is probably not going to look like the current conflict, and particularly if we look at the National Defense Strategy, we're not going to be able to go to bases that are very well protected, that are that have a lot of shielding and everything that goes with that. because for lots of reasons. One, because the enemy has got much more ability to target us, have the intel on us, and he's got a greater capability to inflict damage on us. So we're going to have to be very, very agile. And that means that we're going to have airmen who are very agile and be able to, and if for the Air Force's case, to be able to operate with smaller teams that do more. So what am I talking about? So we're not going to be able to put an entire fighter wing, 100 miles away from the Russian border and expect that it's going to fight. It's going to go 1,000 miles away, and then it's going to send small little groups forward to regenerate aircraft that take off from 1,000 miles away, if you will. And those airmen are going to have to do everything that a normal little air base would do. It's going to have fuel. They're going to have to be able to load weapons, and they're going to have to be able to defend themselves, among other things. And so we're looking at a concept right now called multifunctional airmen, in which we have to have people who have a broad skill set, physical, mentally, intellectually, so that that person who, maybe in the old days used to just pump gas, now is also loading up 20 millimeter cannon for a reload on an F-16. Or maybe he's got an M16 and he's pulling perimeter security for those 3 or 4 hours that team's on the ground to turn the aircraft, get him out of there. And then that team somehow has to exfiltrate the situation. Requires a very different type of person. And these concepts that we've been talking about here are exactly the ones that the Air Force are trying to bring in to our airmen. But there's another piece of this that we haven't talked as much about, and that's a culture. We have to change the culture, at least in our Air Force, of what it means to be expeditionary, and what it means to fight in the next realm. And that to me is just as important as the physical and mental part of it.
Yeah. So in sports, the term is utility player, right? So,
Exactly.
the airmen have to become more utility players, and not specialized to do one thing. What's interesting, at least in sports, is it's the utility players that tend to be less injured as well, because they're able to do a different tasks and exposures as opposed to that same exposure over and over again. General Frost, back to you. How do you see COVID? Obviously we've talked most importantly about our armed forces. How do you see it affecting the health of the general population, and how that obviously impacts our military as a whole as well? Colonel Arms mentioned recruiting stations as being a key focus for the Marines, but if you could talk a little bit about the general population.
Yeah, sure, Phil. And I want to do that by first starting off with the military. I think there's three, and this kind of gets at a couple of the questions I've seen in the chats too. I think there's three major things the military has to focus in on, and this will segue right into the national question you asked. I think first is parts and supplies, and I would couch that as the defense industrial complex. So what shortcomings, what reliance on other nations through contractors, subcontractors, as our defense industrial complex have outside of the U.S. We have got to have a spotlight on that and know that. I think our nation sees that with just, through COVID and through the dependence on a lot of countries in Asia. How is our defense industrial complex down the line dependent on that? I think that needs a look. That's a strategic side we need to look at. The second thing is, and General Murray has mentioned this a couple times, is the strategy and the threats. We have had a national defense strategy, go expeditionary, fight in small groups. This threat is going to force us to tactically do what we should have been doing in support of that strategy, because now we see it as relevant and it's in our face. And I think that is another opportunity to do what we've been saying to do. And then the third thing goes to the individual level, and that's health and fitness. I think the importance of health and fitness on the individual level and collective level, I think this will put a spotlight on that as well. And that segues into your question about the nation. And, I don't want to get too much into the quagmire of who is affected by COVID and who's not and who's at risk, et cetera. But I do hope that what this does is spotlight the fact that we are not as healthy, not as fit as we should be as a nation, when only 29% of young Americans aged 17 to 24 can even qualify to serve in the United States military from a health and fitness standpoint. Most of that due to physical, some of it due to other reasons, standards and mental problems. But the bottom line is most of it is physical. And so I think, when the dust settles, we're going to see, when we look at this population that's been affected by COVID the most, and we look at risks, we're going to see that those that are more healthy and those that are more fit generally probably were better equipped or able to handle the COVID environment. And so I think that's going to force people individually to think about it. And I hope that this generation coming up sees that and tries to turn the worm on this health and fitness decline that we've seen in our nation, which I think in a generation or two could be an existential threat to our nation, because we have to be able to defend ourselves. You must be healthy and fit to defend yourself and to secure the nation. It's about national security, even on an individual level.
Yeah, and hopefully, one of the terms that General Winter used was empowerment, and hopefully as this new generation feels more empowered by technology, they start taking more ownership, over their own health and preparation. Question, Colonel Arms, a lot of what you've been doing, has been empowering Marines, athletic trainers and people actually serving, with regards to corpsmen and medics. Should they be receiving that same training to play a role in terms of mitigation and treating MSK injuries as well, do you think?
Well, that's one of the good things about the athletic trainers that we're hiring. The position description, if you will, for those that we've hired, they had to have at least 5 years experience at Division I, the professional, the Olympic level. Most have many years beyond that. So, case in point, at First Marines, they had one that spent 25 years with the Olympic level. So these ATs bring a lot of experience with them. And so the cross-pollination with the corpsmen, of being able to look at things, and I was out talking with one of the independent duty corpsmen, which we had out in Camp Pendleton, and they were honest with me that they were a little hesitant about this athletic trainer. They're not medical folk. They can't diagnose a problem like a doctor can, but they've been around so many injuries that they have a pretty good idea of what the injury is. And they would tell the IDC, hey, this is what we think it is. The doctor would confirm that time and time again. So the cross-training with the corpsmen is great, because the athletic trainers don't deploy. But the corpsmen do. So the ATs teaching classes to the units, teaching more higher level skill sets to the corpsmen, because the corpsmen are going to be deploying with the Marines. I think it's the second, third order effects of bringing on this specialty. We haven't even started to scratch the surface yet of all that. And the units that they're in right now, they've only been out there for about 18 months. That's what the commanders are telling me is, hey, I've got 2, can I get 4? Can I get 6? You just want more and more of this. Again, it's the same guys 18 months ago, they're asking me how the heck I used the thing. I used them. So I think that cross-pollination is absolutely there. And also, as we start fielding more technology, the AT knows how to use a force plate. They know how to use all the biosensors, and more importantly, once they get that biometric data, what does it mean to the individual Marines? So I think the Air Force has done a great job at a unit down in San Antonio that I went to visit, where they take all the entry-level training folks going through some very specialized skill sets, and they utilize a bunch of technology. And when they get through their training pipeline, they're so used to using that technology that they go out and purchase it on their own. I kind of threw the red flag up when I was down there, and they told me that they can look at the app and look who's red, look who's yellow, and change their training for that day. And I said, there's no way. You can't do that with 400 people going through it. And one of the senior enlisted airmen pulled up his app, and he showed me this guy, Aguilar, I think his name was red. And he said, Aguilar had 3 hours of sleep last night. And so something's not right. Well, I was up in the athletic training room about an hour later. There's a guy with a white t-shirt with Aguilar on his chest. And I said, hey, Aguilar, how'd you sleep last night? And he says, not very good. And I said, why? He said, well, I hurt my knee at PT yesterday, and it was just keeping me up all night. Well, that guy it was like 8:30 in the morning. He was already in the ATR getting treated. So that's I think what we need to go to across all the forces, maybe not every unit, but at some units as much as practical, because I don't care, airman, sailor, Marine, if they understand the why behind the technology, they're savvy enough. They'll pick it up and they'll want to use it. So,
yeah, and I think that examples like that are just great representations of the organizational alignment that can be created, not only is created in the military, but then technology can help augment. Wanted to thank everybody, for joining us today. Huge thank you to the panelists. Very unique group of skill sets, experiences. I know I'm leaving not only more informed, but also more, just confident in the military's both resilience during this time and really modernization that continues to occur. So much we can learn leadership-wise, displayed by U.S. forces and allies. And no better place when we talk about responding to complex problems.